Um, so hoping everyone can hear me, and we're going to get started on the session since it's already 11 here. So good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Ramya Nair. I'm the VP of Strategy, Alliances and Customer Success at Khoj Information Technology. We have a packed session today, and I promise you no fluff and generic slides. What you're going to hear over the next hour is real. It's real approaches, real customer stories, and real outcomes that you can potentially apply. So before I get into the introductions, let me just say we are thrilled to be doing this session alongside Microsoft and US LBM, two of our partners that we deeply respect, and two names that give everything that we're going to share today real credibility. So getting started here with the agenda, here's what we'll cover today. The sequence of this really matters. So we'll start with modernization, why modernization is urgent right now, not in 18 months, but right now. And then Harold from Microsoft will share what an AI-ready integration foundation actually looks like on Azure. That is coming to you straight from the Microsoft product team. And then Ganesh from US LBM and Deepak from Khoj will walk you through what a real migration BizTalk to Azure integration services using a cursor AI-led approach looks like. That's a real live customer story. It's not a case study from 2 years ago. Post that, Deepak will also be covering the TIBCO Modernization Playbook using the GitHub Copilot approach to migrate multiple integrations at scale. And we'll close with how to get started and a sneak preview of Atom for integrations, which is Khoj's observability platform. And we'll also save some Q&A time at the end. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any point, and we'll get to them. So going through the speakers, I would like to introduce you to who you're really going to hear from today, because the strength of this session is really in the room. So we'll start with Harold. Harold is the principal product manager at Microsoft, leading product strategy for Azure Logic Apps and modernization of the legacy middleware to Azure. Harold is literally, the product owner for Logic Apps. So when he talks about the path forward, he's not guessing it, he's built it. So, and then Ganesh is the director of application development at US LBM, a multi-billion building products business, which runs about 400 plus locations across 37 states. Ganesh has been leading the customer experience modernization at US LBM and will share the real story of what worked and what didn't and what they do differently. And then Deepak Pushkarna, who's our director of cloud services delivery at Khoj. He has architected and delivered modernization programs for US LBM, Campbell's, Carter Lumber, and others. And he'll be walking through the technical approaches today. And I'm Ramya Nair. I lead strategy alliances and customer success. I've spent about 20 years working with Fortune 1000 companies on exactly these kinds of transformation decisions. So between us, we have decades of experience in the space, and more importantly, we have real deployments behind all of the claims that you will hear today. So before I move on, a quick introduction to who Khoj is and what we do. So a quick word on Khoj. So we've been around since 1998. We are a niche professional services and product firm. We have about 200 plus professionals. We are headquartered in Ramsey, New Jersey, and have a delivery center working out of Gurgaon, India. We serve Fortune 100 clients, and we've been doing so ever since our inception. We are a Microsoft solutions partner with advanced specializations across SAP on Azure, data and AI, digital and app innovation. And as of last week, we are an officially designated partner on Microsoft AI apps. So that was a designation that was earned through a rigorous audit of our real delivery and, not just certifications. So that's the company behind everything you're going to hear today. So now to start with the real session, the AI, I want to just quickly cover something very honest. So before we go into solutions, I want to talk to you about what a Monday morning looks like for most IT teams that are running legacy integrations, right? So typically there's a 6 a.m. alert, an order flow that failed overnight, or an invoice that failed overnight. Nobody knows why. There are multiple logs scattered across 4 different tools, and businesses calling. Then you step into an archaeology project where someone needs to change an integration. The original developer is not around. He left 3 years ago. There's no documentation, and honestly, nobody wants to touch it, right? The manual fix. So this is the same spreadsheet reconciliation. It's usually done by the same person every single week because automating it will require touching your integration layer, right? And then there's the AI blocker. So, whenever your team wants to connect to Copilot, to a critical system, right, the answer is always that you can't expose it cleanly through the integration layer, and therefore the project is kind of stalling, right? So I want to ask if any of you have had a Monday morning that looks like this. So if you did, drop a yes on the chat, right? Because this is not a technology problem, it's a business velocity problem, right? And it compounds every quarter that you don't address it. It truly is a magnified problem. So now there's a shift, as you've all seen in the market, right? So your AI strategy is ready, but your integration stack isn't. That's not a provocative statement. We hear it almost from every enterprise that we talk to right now. 85% of enterprises have an AI roadmap. Less than 30% can execute it at scale. And the number one blocker is almost always the integration layer underneath, right? So this shift, AI is already here, and AI being AI ready means something your legacy middleware was not designed to give, like real-time data, event-driven architecture, clean API exposure, right? So that's what makes this conversation urgent and something that needs to occur today, not in the future. Now, what do we mean by why legacy integration can't scale anymore? So, legacy integration was built for a very predictable world, right? Batch processing, point to point connections, on premise infrastructure, and it almost worked for decades, right? And it's still working in many organizations barely today. But what modern business truly demands is real-time responsiveness, right? API-led connectivity, elastic scalability, intelligent observability end-to-end, right? So the gap between these two columns that you see here is where your AI projects are getting stuck. It's where your operational pain is coming from. Queue buildup, messages piling up, high maintenance effort, complex dependencies, right? It's not just about infrastructure transformation, it's about operational transformation, right? Um, and before I head to anything further, what happens if you do not move forward, right? What happens if you know if what is the cost of standing still, right? So the cost of standing still is, rising cost of ownership, your legacy platform licenses, your infrastructure costs that continue to grow every day, slower response to change. Every business request that touches your integration takes your team 2 weeks. Your competitors who have already modernized are doing it in days. You're accumulating risk, SLA breaches, data inconsistencies, security vulnerabilities, right, in your outdated middleware. Each one is a liability in itself, right? And AI initiatives, they stay blocked. Knowledge concentration, the person I'm talking about, the one who knows the system. When they leave, everything just crystallizes into crisis. And then there's the technical debt that deepens every month, and of inaction, right? So the cost of doing nothing is not zero, it actually compounds every quarter. And that leads us to the turning point, right? So modernization used to be a great idea before AI. Legacy integration was expensive, brittle. It worked, but you could live with it. Batch processing was acceptable. Visibility gaps were tolerable. Slow deployments were normal. But with AI, it's all changed, right? Every AI initiative in your organization um, wants to run needs clean, observable integration underneath. Automation needs speeds of change, and analytics needs observability, and legacy platforms can't provide any of that, right? So modernization improves your infrastructure, and AI readiness transforms how your business operates. So that brings me to the question that what does an AI-ready integration really look like? So I'm going to hand that over to Harold Campos from Microsoft right now, because there's nobody better placed to answer that question than Harold can. So Harold, over to you.
Ramya, thank you so much. And I think you describe exactly what multiple customers are experiencing these days, right? I think everything over the last couple of years have been happening real fast. And we are witnessing a change not only of approach and direction, but also a major shift in technology with how we see that AI is going to be impacting the way how we do things, right? And we're seeing this all across the board. My name is Harold Campos. I'm a principal PM in the Logic Apps team, part of Fashion Integration Services, at the center of Fashion Integration Services. And what I'm going to be speaking about is what's AI-ready integration for Microsoft. Something that hasn't changed over the last 50 to 70 years is the concept of business processes, right? So business processes have been around for a while, right? And even back in the day when the first mainframes were introduced in the 50s, in the 60s, right, there was a clear idea of what a business process was going to look like, right? And it was basically, back then, they had this idea of, steps, workflows, tasks across people, and integrations, basic integrations, data and programs, data and programs. Now that evolves into integrations that will connect applications, data, protocols, powering processes. You will see a myriad of technologies available out there. They all do different things, but essentially provide value through technology. And that plus the workflows, there is this direct relationship that makes us think that there has to be a way where we not only continue doing the things that we do and continue preserving the value that we do, but also add value, right? And I think this is it's essential to recognize that the way how we've been operating today from deterministic is not going away. What is happening is that it will be extended, right? Like if we were working on a rules-based and predictable manner today, with agentic, we can do context-aware and adaptive. We can follow a context-aware and adaptive approach. Same for the static process paths in deterministic, now with dynamic branching from real-time data, as well with manual exception handling into AI-assisted detection and recommendation. So there is this extension that doesn't mean that we are replacing things, and it means that we continue using deterministic workflows with the ability of creating a new layer of intelligence that will adapt to business context and change. And why did I call out mainframes? Because they do a great job on their own in isolation, and they have great innovation, but the market overall is growing all around the world and outside the mainframe as well. So then the point of the things that we used to do worked, it got us there, right? But we want to pursue the path of innovation, and that's exactly what we are striving to do at Microsoft with agentic business processes in Azure Logic Apps. Well, we have a set of Azure integration services that will allow you to connect to systems and through steps and everything. Logic Apps, it's the platform that will allow you to grow business processes in an agentic manner, from automation built for efficiency to orchestration built for intelligence and abundance. It's code-driven, intelligent, conversational, multi-agent. It provides multi-agent collaboration. So all of these things are possible to do, leveraging on the assets that you had, the legacy that you had built, right? And this is applicable to your legacy platforms. So that takes me to how do I get there, right? How do I get to a point where I can not only do my workflows or my business processes in the way how I used to do them, but how do I augment them with AI and make them agentic? So we recently shipped the Logic Apps migration agent that will allow you to do a modern gradual set of agents for that is a modern gradual set of agents for integration platform migration. So if you are running multiple platforms, for instance, BizTalk server or others, other middlewares in the in the stack like TIBCO, MuleSoft, or others, you can use this agent to bring those workloads into Logic Apps. Now, one question that I get asked very often is, besides the value, of course, of doing this, right? Because we are bringing innovation and we are growing where innovation is. Why will I just use this agent as opposed to just go and run any model, right? And do that on my own. I think with essentially what we've built in the Logic Apps product group is we've created the platform for you to be grounded. So what you build, it gets built correctly with the right skills in for Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services, right? So this agent includes best practices by design and extensibility as well. It provides enterprise scale definitions and refactoring for BizTalk and others, as I said. And every time that you do something with the agent, like for instance, discovery or planning or conversion, there is a human in the loop engaged. So then you can stop and then you can ask hey, listen, this is the analysis that you did, or this is the discovery that you did. Let's change it. Let's change the flavor for it. Let's add more artifacts. And that's exactly what we strive to do with the agent, right? Get this human in the loop across each stage of the modernization process. So while you can do modernization, in just, I don't know, a few hours of a specific project or multiple projects, the whole idea is for you to own the modernization to Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services, right? This will give you a choice of deployment options to be in the cloud or to be on premises with our hybrid deployment model. So you can run not only in the cloud, right? But if you, for multiple reasons, you need to run on premises for regulations or because of latency as well, you can deploy Logic Apps on premises as well with the hybrid deployment model that is hybrid because all of the runtime runs on premises in containers, but the control plane, that's the data plane, but the control plane runs in the cloud. Now, in the few minutes that I have left, I will be just showing you real quick what the Logic Apps migration agent does. It comes as a VS Code extension, and you will be able to just point to a directory where you have all of your legacy workloads like BizTalk, like MuleSoft, like TIBCO, and it will do, the first thing that it will do is a discovery phase, right? What it calls it's called the analysis phase. And it will do the analysis. And it will give you all of these options to do planning, creation, execution, and open the workspace in VS Code. What is important to mention is that you will see that there is a concept of logical groups introduced here that are created to refactor your legacy solution into the cloud, because this is what we call it migration agent. It's not really a migration agent. It's a refactoring agent. It will take your legacy system. It will understand the flows, and it will suggest you, okay, this is the way how it has to be implemented in Logic Apps. And that's why, the customers who have been running this for the last month and a half, we've been working with some early adopters, they are seeing a lot of value because, it does a complete refactoring of code and artifacts. So it's not just moving things, right? It will move artifacts for sure, right? The schemas, maps, and everything, but it will go beyond to make sure that your solution is scalable and enjoy the benefits of elasticity in the cloud. So to have access to this agent, you have to go to the marketplace, to the VS Code marketplace. You will find the extension Logic Apps Migration Agent. You install it, and once you have it installed, then you can use it. This is open source, so you can make as many customizations to it as you want, right? So you can go to github.com, Azure Logic Apps Migration Agent, and you will be able to make changes to it. Right now, we have support for BizTalk Server because we own BizTalk, right? So we know BizTalk best. My team builds BizTalk Server, right, and Logic Apps. So that's why in that case, the team has done a fantastic job in drilling down on all of the peculiarities of the solution. And just wanted to finish, this with this statement, right? You are going to innovate where you integrate. I mean, you typically don't innovate at the extremes, at the endpoints. You innovate when integration happens, and Logic Apps allows you to do integration. Thank you for your time, and over to you, Ramya.
Thank you, Harold. So next we will be going over the US LBM case study presented by Ganesh and Deepak.
Right. Hey, thanks, Ramya. Hey, I'm Ganesh Ramakrishnan. I lead the application development and the enterprise integration team in US LBM. Just to give you a little bit of background, US LBM is in the building material distribution and retail business. Most of our customers are either like large builders or like local custom builders. We run a lot of our internal systems through multiple ERP instances, and then there is a lot of other ancillary systems that sit around it. Early last year, we started modernizing a digital customer experience platform, which our customers mainly interact with US LBM for, to track their orders and deliveries and everything. As we were modernizing the application, we found that there is a lot of backend integrations that existed, which was feeding data into this platform, and that was not modernized. So although the app was modernized, the data and the integrations were not modernized. And as we started looking at how those things were built, it was built using BizTalk, and then a lot of them followed a batch design. So meaning like it's trying to get like X number of records at a certain interval, and then it's trying to push all of them, and there were multiple hops that was taking. So what this resulted in was data getting taking too much time to show up in our digital customer platform. And then also when in case of failure, in batch failures happen, and when that happens, it pretty much you lose a lot of data. So that's where we engaged Khoj to modernize that entire integration infrastructure, and then also the optimize the integration, so that the goal was to get the latest and greatest data in near real time fashion, and then with better monitoring and observability. We can go to the next one, Ramya.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm probably gonna talk a little bit here, and then I'll hand it over to Deepak. As we were going through this discovery process, first thing is we had to go back and really look at integrations which were built many years back, and with like multiple hops from all these different disparate systems. AI helped us really tremendously there. During the same time, our organization also transformed to an AI first development software engineering team, and we adopted Cursor AI for that. So Cursor with the Claude models specifically. So that was used in analyzing the artifacts that existed, and then analyzing the database schemas and the different hops that it was taking for all these integrations. And that helped us really first understand what our dependencies are and what exactly we need to accomplish. And to be honest, as we were doing this, I think what could have taken us months to do discovery, we were able to do it within days with the help of Cursor. And then I'm going to maybe hand it over to Deepak to talk about the architecture. I think our goal, the outcome that we wanted to achieve here was get near real-time data into our from all these different systems, multiple ERP systems, largest systems that handle logistics and billing and invoices, get, get them in near real-time fashion without any data loss, and then also to make sure that all of these things are correlated. So for example, like, an order would get placed first and then later deliveries would get scheduled. So you want to make sure there is a correlation that exists between all these things. So we had to make sure the architecture supported these outcomes. And then we were, our team, we were pretty much invested in the Azure platform for all of this. So we, I'm going to maybe hand it over to Deepak here and talk about the architecture that was chosen for this.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. Hey all. So I'll talk, on this slide itself, I'll talk about what architecture, what stack we use, right, to modernize it. So we used AIS, Azure Integration Services. As part of it, our stack pretty much included Logic Apps, Azure Functions, Service Bus, Event Grids, API Management, and Azure DevOps primarily for most of our integrations at US LBM. We also implemented Atom for INT, which is our observability platform, which we use to audit, trace, and monitor our transactions as well as the business transactions as well. We'll delve deep on this topic later in the presentation though. But this was pretty much our overall AIS stack, right? Now, just spending half a minute on this, right? So as part of the modernization and migration work, the outcome was faster processing, right? So, we actually used a microservices-based architecture to actually achieve it. So I'll discuss more on it and how did we do it in subsequent slides. So I'll move forward with the next slide. So this one talks about, right, what are the key constraints which we faced, right? So as Ganesh mentioned, that we followed a 3-phased approach as part of this initiative. The first phase was discovery, right? So when we actually started discovery, we found out, these are the constraints which we faced. And I'm assuming that most of the customers who have BizTalk as their legacy integration platform, they face this issue because they have been running this integration from years and years, right? So, and especially at US LBM, what we saw was zero documentation, right? There was some documentation, very minimum, which was out there, right? So that was one blocker for us, that we could not have any documentation on what orchestrations are there, what maps are there, what interfaces are active. Some of the interfaces were running but not doing anything. So that was one. Source code was missing, right? So, there were multiple integrations or interfaces, but we didn't have, I'll say maybe 20% of source code was available, but rest of the 80%, there was nothing out there, right? So that was a big constraint for us. Then BizTalk was running on Azure VM. A couple of years back, we migrated the whole BizTalk environment from on-premise to Azure, but now they are running on Azure VM. BizTalk has the limitation that, an older version 2016 can only run on an older VM, right? So even the Azure VM OS was an old one, which is again a technology debt on us. The next one was the ESB portal was inaccessible because of the access issues. Some of the user ID which were used, we didn't have password of that, right? Which basically limits us that, oh, you can't do XYZ things, right? Exception and tracking logs were not available, right? So this was another big blocker because we didn't have access to source code, right? In order to troubleshoot and find out what's running and not, we had to enable, right, tracing or tracking. But then because of Azure VM space crunch, we can't do it, right? And we can't even change, right, what is the target, location of the tracing logs. So this was another blocker. So these were a couple of blockers which we faced, right? Even on the BizTalk side, right? Since it is 2016, we faced versioning issues with Visual Studio. Now, how we overcome all of that, right? So basically, that's where the AI really shined, right? So earlier we were planning to do all of it through manual discovery process, which was, the plan estimates were given of months and months, right? Because of all of these limitation. And that's where we said, okay, let's spend some time and effort to understand how can we use AI to our advantage. So in this case, we used Cursor AI, right, to our advantage. And I'll spend some more time in the subsequent slide on how we used AI for our advantage. But then our plan was to move to Azure Integration Services, which is more cloud native architecture. We use event-driven architecture, microservices based architecture, right? Azure, as Harold mentioned, right, it comes up with more than 400 plus connectors over SaaS platforms, ERPs, e-commerce platforms, right? And the goal, right, was to really bring up real-time streaming, async messages, to bring down the overall time from an hour of updates to in minutes, right? So that was the expectation, which we meet based using this platform. We also bring in self-service observability platform. Now, the idea behind that was to empower our business users that they can actually self-serve, right? They can see themselves where their transactions are. Typically, what happens is they are dependent on the technical team, right? The technical integration team on where their transactions are, where their purchase order are, what are their updates on say delivery, right? Now this will empower them that they can actually see it themselves in a more workflow based chart, right? Then we also moved to a paper execution costing model, which actually helped us that, rather than we spending money on compute costs, server licenses. Now, if you have a compute, you're spending time, time and effort and money on managing those computes, right? Or infrastructure. Now, in this case, we chose a PaaS platform where you don't have an overhead of patching, scaling, right? So basically, that is another positive about AIS, right? Out of a lot of other positives. And then this architecture which we has built-in HA capability, DR capability, and since it is a modern platform, right, it follows all the compliance controls. So let me move forward. So this talks about, right, how truly we used Cursor and Claude to actually accelerate our migration process, right? So I'll talk about both of them here, right? So basically we used Cursor AI. Now Cursor is a IDE which has an embedded agent in it, and you can use Cursor to develop as well as integrate with your knowledge bases. Yeah, knowledge bases can be DevOps, where you're placing the repository, where you're placing the code, or it can be the SQL servers, where you have all the existing code, existing jobs, right? So you can pretty much integrate this with all of your knowledge bases, right? Now, how did we use Cursor AI? So we used Cursor AI to basically parse BizTalk binding XMLs. We did a reverse engineering on orchestration flows as well as MSI artifacts, right? So now MSI and DDLs were there, which are compiled binaries, right? So we moved all of those binaries in DevOps and then linked them with Cursor. Cursor was able to deep dive into it and find out those orchestration flow itself, right? We also used a .peek, which is another application or a tool, which helped us in this case to basically pull out the mappings, right? So we were using XSLT as well as mapping, across most of the interfaces at BizTalk, but because of missing code base, right, we could not find the actual map. So that's where this tool actually helped us. Again, what we pulled out from this tool was mapping, and then we supplied that mapping to AI, Cursor AI, which helped us in design as well, right? At the end, we use Cursor to actually generate, logic app workflows in a JSON format. We were able to also generate bicep code, right, which helped us in creating some of the or deploying some of the logic apps, function apps, as well as some configurations for service buses as well, right? So that's where, end to end on a high level, we use Cursor. Now we also use Claude, right? So I'll spend maybe 2 minutes on this, on why did we use Claude, right? So before even going that right. So we basically, in these are the three phases which we followed, right? Discovery, architecture, and then final conversion, right? Now, when we were using Cursor, right, our initial, right, like when we started our AI journey maybe an year back, right, at that time we were dependent on prompts, right? So we were creating prompts for per interface, right? And then even we standardized those prompts that, okay, we'll write prompts for any interface, right, in general. But then we took a next step. We said, okay, what we'll do is we'll create skill-based files, right? So we created skill files, which is nothing but instruction files, where we are saying that we follow a standard in US LBM in this case, right? We follow a standard. We wrote a skill file, which is an instruction file to have all those standards, right? And we divided that skill file into three different phases. So we created one skill file for discovery, right? Another skill file for architecture and another one for conversion. And what we found out is that the Claude is actually better to create a skill file for us. We tried a couple of other AI tools as well, but the success ratio of Claude at that time was very high, right? And so we use Claude basically to create the structured skill files in MD format. We produced XSLT code equivalent to BizTalk orchestration, right? We also applied the naming convention, as I said, the standards, right? So we actually, in the instruction file, we added naming convention, security protocols, right? Whether we want to, create all the workflows in private network, how the connectivity works, all of that, right? So that was the advantage of Claude. Now at the end, right, I'll just quickly walk through, right, how each one of these MD files worked. So basically the first one, as I mentioned, discovery MD file. So that actually enabled us to track all the BizTalk interfaces. It actually tracked, the trace flows, orchestration debugger, right? And then we actually ran some additional tool, right, which is the .peek tool to actually pull out the binding files, right? On architecture, right, we did the same, right? So we used another MD file, which actually helped us document all the business flows, right? So each of the interfaces have their own business flows, as well as the logical flows, as well as physical flows, right? So we created all of that using Cursor itself, right? Now, what we saw was it was giving us 80% of success, right? The rest of the 20% we have to tweak a little bit, right? At the end, right, again, we created another MD file, which helped us in creating these files such as logic app workflows, function app code, even CI/CD pipelines, right? So at the end, right, so everything squared down to what, right? It squared down to what it delivered to us, right? So basically, as part of this whole initiative, what we achieved after all, right? Because that is what is important. So what we had achieved was we actually achieved a 90% of reduction in order processing. So our goal was that we want to go equal, right, near real time, right? So before start of the project, right, we were, so as Ganesh mentioned, I'll spend half a minute there. So US LBM was using Connect, which is a mobile application to track delivery updates of the deliveries US LBM makes, right? So what we were seeing is that typically, right, they were taking close to 30 to 45 minutes to get those updates, which means that the end customers of US LBM have to wait for 30 to 45 minutes to see if their delivery is on the way or it is delivered, right? And that was our goal, right? So we actually reduced that to under 2 minutes, right? So that is one goal, and which was achieved. Then we, as part of this integration was basically getting data from multiple ERP systems. And these ERP systems were serving close to 400 locations across 37 states. We also have an issue with onboarding process, right? So anytime we were onboarding new divisions or new locations, that onboarding is tedious because the configuration is tedious on BizTalk, right? So we made the onboarding simple so that it does not take much time to onboard and go live with a location, right? So that is one. during our migration process, since we followed those three-step process, so three-phase process, we actually achieved zero downtime migration, right? As part of this, AI helped us in basically saving weeks of effort, right? So one of the example is discovery, right? Weeks of effort to days, right? So I'll go to the key takeaways. So basically, the key takeaways were the BizTalk, uh, you know, the migration was non-negotiable. The reason for that was it was end of life, right? End of starting of next year, it will be end of life, no extended support. So we achieved that, right? Using cursor and skill files, we replaced manual artifacts analysis with AI-driven discovery, right? Using the three-phase structure approach, we ensured that there are zero interfaces were missed. And then at the end, right, we actually increase the quality of documentation, right? Now that documentation which we have will go a long way, right? Because going forward, any new changes which you have to do, if you have strong documentation, you can actually build on top of it. So with that, that finishes the US LBM case study. So I'll take a pause and move to the second one. So the second case study actually takes us all the way to the other end of the world, guys, right? So where the first, client of ours was US LBM, more US centric, right? Metcash is our second client, which is in Australia, right? So Metcash is Australia's leading wholesale distribution company, right? So Metcash partnered with us to migrate their legacy platform. So they were using TIBCO as their legacy integration platform, right? So Metcash basically helps thousands of retail outlets in Australia in their grocery, hardware, and liquor business, right? So what we noticed was there were close to 250 plus in TIBCO integrations, right, which have to be modernized, right? So our goal was to modernize it, and as part of that modernization effort, we actually saw some business pain points and technical pain points, which I'll quickly walk you through on what were they, right, and then how did we achieved to mitigate it, right? So basically, the business pain points which were for us was the whole process, right, was all distributed, right? They were disconnected integrations, which were not, they were dependent business wise to each other, but they were not linked together, right, as a single entity, and they were all secluded, right? So that was one big issue, that there was no dependency on each other, that make it more difficult to troubleshoot, monitor, and trace, right? Since it was all on-premise, it was less scalable, right? And they were facing a lot of performance bottlenecks because of the legacy architecture, right? So because of these two issues, they were also facing a lot of manual intervention, right? So whenever they were doing financial closing, reporting, and order processing, a lot of manual interventions were required, and which causes a lot of delays, and even the quality of reports were not that good, right? Because they were fetching multiple reports from multiple systems and then manually collating it together, right? The next thing is cost. It always comes down to cost, guys, right? So basically, because of this legacy architecture, monolithic architecture, right? They were spending a lot of money and cost on maintenance as well as technical challenges, right? And at the end, the monitoring and troubleshooting was a big issue because they cannot see, there was no single pane of glass where they can see their transaction end to end, right? So coming down to the technical pain points, right? So as I already mentioned, that their TIBCO based integration was fragmented, slow. They have siloed data flows. There was no observability layer. They have zero DevOps maturity, right? So because they were doing a lot of manual promotions, deployments, they were not using any DevOps CI/CD pipelines for all of it, right? So what we did was we created a modern platform for them, which actually covers not just business pain points, even technical pain points. Yeah. So let me move forward. Yeah, let me move forward on the solution approach, right? So again, similar to US LBM, we follow a standard approach, right, across all of our clients, where in this case also we followed a three-phased approach, starting with discovery, architecture, and modernization. Now, the only difference in this approach was we use GitHub Copilot, right? So in this case, the IDE which was used, which is recommended by Microsoft, is Visual Studio and VS Code. Now, both of them have a connector with GitHub Copilot, and you can think about using GitHub Copilot along with Visual Studio, and Visual Studio can then connect to your knowledge bases, which is Azure DevOps, your SQL servers, SharePoint, you name it, right? So whichever knowledge base you have on Azure, it can connect to all of them through MCP servers, right? So that's what we use. So that made us more, so we have used both the AI tools, right? Cursor as well as GitHub Copilot. So again, the bottom line is same, right? We use GitHub Copilot in similar fashion, right? In discovery, by where we actually discovered the different integrations, discovered different mapping, extracted the code, extracted the interface, right? And then documented each and every artifact using GitHub Copilot, right? And as part of architecture, we actually we actually build, right, logic app like designs, function app designs, to identify which integration pattern to choose, right? And then also created TSDs, which is technical specification document, as part of this deliverable, all through GitHub Copilot, right? So we did a good 2 months initiative with Metcache, where we actually did close to around 20 use cases, right, on how to use GitHub Copilot more efficiently. And in this project, we actually used it, right? At the end, we use GitHub Copilot to actually code it for us, right? So we build these workflows, we build these Azure functions through GitHub Copilot, which made sure that we have faster timelines, better code quality, right? Intelligent operations. And at the end, we tested that those interfaces as well through GitHub Copilot as well, right? So, again, quickly, right? The technology stack which we used on AIS was Logic Apps, Azure Functions, Service Bus, Event Grid, API Management, GitHub Copilot, and then Atom for INT, which we'll spend 2 minutes later. So I'll quickly go through, this slide, which talks about the bottlenecks, right? So why we choose to move away from TIBCO, right? So some of it you've already seen in the technological issue, but I'll quickly go through this. So this is basically the on-premise architecture. We can, it was on-premise. We were doing a full-blown cloud adoption journey for Metcache, right? So TIBCO was, it cannot leverage cloud elasticity. That is one problem, right? The adapters were more proprietary, right? So if we had to make any changes to it, it is very difficult, not very closely coupled with Azure, which is their roadmap going forward, right? Slow release cycles because they were doing all of things manually, right? Siloed observability, like each of the interface has their own tracing mechanism, right? So that was another problem for them. Monolithic integration pattern. So this basically causes a batch issue, right? That each batch is dependent on each other, which makes the overall integration and end-to-end tracking or integrate, your transactions more slow, right? And what we achieved from AIS was 3x faster delivery, 60% lower infrastructure cost because now you're running your workloads on a PaaS platform, right? And then we used close to 400 native connectors which are available. And then even at Metcache, we deployed Atom for INT to give us end-to-end business activity monitor, right? And that also helps the business users at Metcache to basically see their transactions from end to end, right? So I'll spend quickly on this since you have already seen the same structure at US LBM as well. But GitHub Copilot, we use end-to-end in this case. And in this case also, we use the same approach, right? We use GitHub Copilot and skill-based file framework, right, to our advantage, where we created separate skill file for each one of these phases, right? At the end, I'll finish with, what did we achieved by doing this, right? So like at US LBM, in this case, we actually achieved 60% of lower infrastructure cost. We actually improved the performance of these integrations, right? Interfaces, we made them 3x faster, right? Because we used Logic App standard tier and ASC environment, we actually were able to achieve 99.9% of SLA, right, given by Logic App, right? And then since we used AI, it again brought down our workload, right, or our estimates from weeks to days, right? Now, our key takeaways for that were these, right? So higher accuracy, less rework, more reusable across whole team. So the MD files and SIL file which we created can be reused for multiple integrations, right? Not just one. And then full audit trail per interface, right? So since we used Atom for INT, it gave us end-to-end tracing for each of our interfaces, right? And then at the end, right? So we modernized TIBCO. It's not just a technology choice, but it's a business capability decision, right? So with that, I finish, my presentation. Ramya,
Thank you. Thanks,
I'll
Deepak.
hand it over
Thanks
to
for
you.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, real quick, I know we have somebody raised hands here. So I'll just quickly cover up the last two slides that we have. So one thing that we wanted to point out is as you modernize, it's also very important to look at. We've talked about modernizing the integration layer, but there's a second layer that most organizations completely overlook, and that's the layer that determines whether your operations actually improve after the migration, and that layer is the observability layer, right? So if you see here, that's what we have successfully implemented at a lot of our customers, right? And that's where Atom for Int comes in. Atom for Int is a proprietary observability and intelligence platform. It sits on top of your integration layer to give you four things, right? Foremost, right? The first one is end-to-end transaction lineage. You can see every stage of transaction across every system in real time, right? So you can actually see where it went, where it stopped, and why. Second, we have paired it with AI-assisted root cause analysis. When something fails, Nucleus chatbot is there to look at what happened. Is there a similar issue in the past? What is the action that you can take? All of this is done in minutes, not in hours. The third is that for known errors, there's a Catalyst, our agentic AI feature on Atom for Int, which helps promote self-healing automatically without human intervention. And finally, it offers self-service for business users. Your business teams can ask, why did this order fail in plain language and get an answer without raising an IT ticket? Right. So that's what we mean when we say AI-ready operations. It's not just modern infrastructure, it's intelligent, proactive, self-service operations on top of it. And with that, the moment something fails, you have end-to-end transaction lineage, right? So observability is not just monitoring, it's knowing what happened to every transaction every time. So with that, I will. There's a last slide where we want to just be direct with you and give you a proof of value for Atom for Int. So the first couple of days, we will work with you to identify one high-impact integration flow, one critical business process where you currently have blind spots today. We define the observation points and set up the proof of value blueprint. And then days 3 and 5, we will work with you to track that flow on Atom so you can see real value out of this. This is all on your actual data, not on a demo environment. So by the end of this 1 week, you will have real visibility into one critical integration. So that is an offer that we are doing currently on Atom. Right, if you're interested, we have limited spots for this one. Please do scan the QR code shown so that we